So I have one sibling, older sister, similar age gap to you two, about 3.5 years. And your dynamic actually reminded me of it when you were saying, like, you know, you were breaking the mold, and just like the relationship with parents and the dynamic there. My sister was like the golden child, and straight A's, like exactly what my mom wanted in a firstborn child. I think in a lot of ways, like, got the best, highest GPA in my high school's history, got into every single college that she applied to, a physics major at Yale in college, just like unbelievably high achieving, like beautiful, always like, you know, well put together, presented extremely well, just like everything. And I, as I was growing up, was the like ne'er-do-well kind of shithead younger brother who just wanted to play baseball. And, you know, there's like a competitive tension among siblings, especially growing up, where because I didn't feel like I was as capable as her academically, I sort of like felt like there was a resentment that got created between us, where I kind of resented the success she was having and that she was achieving all of these things that made my parents so proud, and that like I didn't feel through my own insecurity that I was capable of that. And as a result, for the vast majority of our lives, we were sort of in slightly different stages, and we were never close. We always had this like tension in our relationship between us. And then everything changed when my son was born. And in a lot of ways, I feel like after 30 years of living with someone, my sister and I met for the first time.
Wow.
And it's so interesting to think about today. And I've talked to her about this. We've had like deep conversations about it now, that it was the first time in our lives where I felt like we could see each other, that we both had she has a son as well, who's about a year older than my son. And we were in the same stage of life, and there was no more like nonsense, bullshit, competitive tension between us. All of that had been scrubbed away, and we were just able to see each other. And there was so much beauty in it, and it makes my parents so proud and so happy to see now that, like, if they're gone, they know that my sister and I have this connection and have this bond that has come together at this stage of our life. But it, to me, was just a reminder that your relationship with people changes across these seasons of your life. And there are people who you have not had a relationship with, or it's been tense, or it's been competitive or not good. And then suddenly, for some reason, something will click. And in a season of your life when you need them most, everything kind of comes together at the right moment, at the right time. And it's just been such a beautiful, I mean, just in the last year and a half, 2 years, to just see our relationship really come together and have that feeling that for the first time in our lives, we're meeting and having this new relationship.
I mean, we talk about this all the time about, like, it's just us.
Yeah.
Like, when we grow up, and when we were growing up, it was our dad with his brothers. Like, they were running the family. Like, yes, our grandparents were there, but like, they run the family now. And it's weird to think that we're gonna be that when we grow up. And so that's so beautiful that you were able to reconnect.
I remember our nanny sitting, I don't know if you remember, but she sat me down. I think we were fighting at a really young age. And she looked at me and she was mad. I was like in a corner and she was angry at me. And she said, "It's you and your sister for the rest of your life."
Yeah.
For the rest of your life. And when I had a kid, I really realized it, because I'm not speaking about my husband and I. We will be together till the ends of earth. But statistically speaking, in this world, marriages can leave. Relationships can break up.
Yeah,
but the two things that you and your parents pass on, technically the two things that you cannot distance yourself from are your children and your siblings. Those two are a type of biological forever that is one of the most sacred relationships.
Yeah.
Sorry, I did not, well, you know, you're welcome. I was not his older sister, and I totally fucked everything up. And I was not, like, you didn't have to live up to anything.
I know, I was going to say this.
You didn't have to live up to shit.
I know, when you were telling the story, I was like, I wish I could say the same, but you know, she was the one.
Say our dynamic.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Yeah, so Scout, well, growing up, I always looked up to Scout, but Scout grew up with bipolar disorder. Well, she still has bipolar disorder, but her mental health was always like very amplified growing up, whereas my mental health kind of took a back seat. I was always the happy one, the energetic one. I presented that way. So my parents didn't really...
Straight A's. Very academic.
all
I
those
was ditching
things.
school.
Yeah, yeah. So it was kind of like she was in this darkness and I was more this lightness in a way.
Yeah.
She also was just very non-traditional, went to tons of colleges, dropped
5.
out. Who's counting?
Dropped out twice. Never finished.
But
And now you're here.
Yeah, no.
and now we're here, and so
But
honestly,
she was like that, like straight A,
Yeah.
like
That's
USC.
so it was kind of reversed.
Yeah.
But the thing that brought us together was this podcast.
Yeah.
And like we always spoke and we always were close, but it wasn't, and we handled things so differently. Like our parents' divorce, we processed them so differently. But then coming together on this podcast, it's like, it's kind of the moment you were saying where it was like everything clicked and you're like, oh shit, like this is my person.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It is like the sibling relationship in that way. I mean, I once I realized it, and I realized that like it was really my own. It was nothing my sister did. It was my own insecurity.
Yeah.
That I was manifesting out into the world. And by the way, every big mistake I've ever made in my entire life has been driven by my own insecurity.
Yeah.
And that was like for 30 years of my life that I just didn't know who I was yet. And I didn't know what my purpose was and why I was focusing on certain things. I was just chasing some external definition of success that I was defaulting into. And that led to a whole lot of insecurity that I like pushed out into the world in different ways. And my relationship with my sister not being what it should have been was really just a byproduct of that. And so the first step to all of this was me actually saying something to her about that and just telling her like, I'm so glad that we're in this new phase of our life, like almost like reconciling. And we never fought. There was never like some big blow up or anything. It was just like, it was one of those relationships of like, there's just nothing, right? Like it's almost, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like an underlying tension that you don't ever talk about. There's no fight, no blow up. But I needed to step up and say something about it in order to move forward. And so being able to do that was like really challenging for me, frankly, because you have to look at yourself in the mirror about your own insecurities in that way. But I'm so glad that I did.
Yeah. A lot of it is also the stories we make up in our heads. Like I remember there was kind of that distance between me and my dad, and last year I wrote him a letter and I didn't even know like what to write because I was like, I don't even know how to express what's going on. But I wrote this letter and we got on a call and we kind of like pinpointed certain memories in our life and things that at least I held on, but I didn't think it was, appropriate to speak to him about it. We both remembered them so differently. And I was like, you talked to me in this way. And he was like, what? Like you talk, it was so illuminating. And so now I've made this promise to myself that yes, confrontation is hard, like, but it is so much more rewarding when you communicate those things. Like, holy shit, like the person is not a mind reader. And a lot of it is just how you're processing. And as you said, the insecurities, you're making up these stories and it literally might not even be true.
When you avoid a hard conversation, you are taking on a debt that has to be repaid with interest in the future.
Totally.
Yeah, that's good.
And that interest
that's good.
just stacks and stacks and stacks.
Yeah.
Time does
Totally.
not heal anything when it comes to relationships. It is just a debt that you're going to have to repay. And I have had that hammered into my head over and over again. And I still make the mistake.
Yeah, of
and I
course.
still avoid the conversation, the hard
uncomfy.
conversation. But when you just remind yourself of that in the moment and force yourself to have that conversation, you never regret it.
Never.
Also, I love the story you tell yourself. Who was it that said that?
Mark Twain.
No.
Socrates. I think Socrates said it first.
It's the woman, not Esther Perel, the other.
Brene Brown.
Thank you, Brene Brown.
One of those.
As one.
She taught me so. The thing is saying the story I'm telling myself is.
Yeah.
So I talked about this a little bit, but I was having like a body image insecurity moment. We're going to Tulum. I was trying on bathing suits. It's going to be hot. I'm not wearing, a lot of clothing because it's so fucking hot. And I got insecure and I came home and my husband was in the middle of writing his thesis. He's about to get his PhD.
Oh, wow.
So he's like very fucking stressed out. And my daughter is trying to get his attention at the same time. And I think it's a great time to get validation from my husband that I look very sexy in my bikinis. It is not the great time. He's like, yeah, that looks great. And goes back to his thesis. The stories I'm telling myself in my head, my body isn't the same after pregnancy. I'm a mom and I'm not attractive. I need to lose whatever it was. And I stewed on it, and I usually wouldn't say anything, right? And that is such a detriment to my partner because those were not the things that he was thinking. And then an hour later, I said, hey, babe, when I tried on those bathing suits and you said I just looked great, but you didn't give me a big reaction, the story I told myself was. And he was like, oh my God, no, I was just literally in writing my science thesis, and Lily was really trying to get my attention. You looked beautiful in them. And my husband tells me I look beautiful all the time. But it's like, if I didn't say that in that moment, what a fester that would happen in our relationship. And so I've been trying so
little too. It
so
starts
hard.
so little.
Yes, it starts so little. But when it's about your confidence or it's
Yeah,
about like how you feel about yourself, you make mountains out of nothing. And so I'm like, I just have to tell people the story I'm telling myself, because that's an easier way to approach confrontation than like, hey, I feel this way in this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
That's
agree.
brilliant.
I love
it. I've never heard that as a phrasing, but like from a relationship
it's genius.
tactic standpoint, that's genius.
Genius.
I mean, it just cuts through the entire noise. It's I've always talked about like the helped, heard, hugged thing of like when you're having a challenge, you like when the person's coming to communicate you ask them, do you need to be helped, heard, or hugged in that moment? And it's like you're trying to deliver comfort in the way that they want it.
Yes.
And my bias is always to be a fixer, and that's a
You are a
terrible
man.
challenge.
You're a man.
It's a
You are a
terrible
man.
problem in relationships, especially because my wife's love language is touch.
Yeah.
And so really what she always just needed was just to have a hug. At the end of a hard day, confrontation at work, whatever the thing was, she just wanted to be hugged, and she just wanted me to hear, just listen and then give her a hug. And I would be like, well, this, and like,
God.
staring daggers at me, like wanting to murder me. And rightfully so, by the way, in hindsight, now with my like newfound wisdom, quote unquote, of
what you're talking
what I was
about is
doing
like
wrong.
the problem with every heteronormative relationship.
Yeah, totally. But like the idea of like what I heard, like the story I told myself is such a powerful one. Because
taking ownership.
It immediately cuts through the noise. And then he can react to that of like, oh, no, that's absolutely not what it was. And deliver.
And you debunk it.
Yeah.
But you're also not
Immediately.
blaming. You're also not blaming them.
Right.
I'm
It's
also
not creating a fight out of it. That's
I'm
true.
taking like accountability for the stories
That's
I'm
really
telling
true, yeah.
myself versus like me being like, excuse me, why didn't you tell me
that.
I looked beautiful? That's like, because that's a placing blame, right? That's like
exactly.
accusatory. It's accusatory language. Instead, I'm coming to in a vulnerable place and allowing you to see my inner thoughts and what I'm telling myself. It's a complete, like, you are taking accountability for the way you perceived that moment.
Yeah.